I just realized the lights on the ceiling is skew. That's gonna bug me. What's up everyone, my name is BQ and I am here with water cooling tips and tricks for beginners. Now, I was once a beginner too, so don't worry if you're new to it. Everyone has to be new to it at some point to get good at it. But water cooling can seem daunting, but it is also a really cool way to set your system apart from your next door neighbor's simple air-cooled system. It looks badass, you get better temperatures, and it's just in general awesome. So here are some of my tips and tricks for water cooling. Number one, purchasing the components. Now, it's easy to get flustered when buying water cooling components because you get different terminologies like G1 quarter and 3/8 inch ID, 5/8 inch OD. Or was that the other way around? Oh, something like that. But basically, some things that you need to look out for is when you're purchasing tubing and your fittings, make sure that your tubing and fittings are the same size. So you're going to want like half-inch or it's half-inch ID, 3/4 inch OD, and then something like that. So that's one size, half-inch ID, 3/4 inch OD, and then there's 5/8 inch ID, 3/4 inch OD, I think is another size, but just make sure that that ID and OD line up for the fittings. If you're getting compression fittings, and it's especially important that your, by the way, ID and OD stand for internal diameter and external diameter. Alternal diameter? That doesn't make sense. But anyway, so make sure that your fittings and your tubing are the same size. So if you're getting compression fittings, make sure that the OD is the same size as the tubing's OD so that everything will fit together perfectly. That's one. Then make sure the basic components, you need a block for every component, a water block for every component that you're water cooling. So your CPU typically, and your graphics card if you're putting a graphics card in the loop. You need a radiator, you need a pump, and you need a reservoir and/or reservoir pump combo. In radiator sizes, you typically get 120 millimeter. If you get radiators for 120 millimeter fans and 140 millimeter fans, so make sure the fans that you're getting match the size of the radiator that you're getting. 120 millimeter radiator will work with a 120 millimeter fan. And make sure that just in general, and the fittings, usually the most common fitting type that you'll get is G1 quarter, which is the thread type. So make sure that all the thread for your radiator and your blocks and your fittings all match. So that is it for purchasing the components. You've got all the components, now what's next? Number two is planning the loop. Look at your system, or even sketch it up if you want, but look at your system and just think for as long as you need to think how you're going to do it. Are you going to go CPU to radiator, from radiator to pump, from pump to reservoir, from reservoir to CPU? If you're adding a graphics card, how are you going to run it? And if just things like that. Look at your system a while and just get an idea for how you want to plan your loop. It does help if you want to take a picture of your system and draw in just in pencil or in paint or whatever you want. Just draw in where you want your tubing to go and how you want it to work. That is a big part, so that you have a game plan for when you're going into building your system. Now, number three, set aside at least 3 to 4 hours to build your system. It can take a while because things go wrong and you're going to have to make some changes, and just set aside a decent amount of time. I would recommend at least 3 to 4 hours to build your system. Now, this is important. Position of the components does not matter, except for the position of the pump and the reservoir. The reservoir or the pump should always feed directly from the reservoir, and the reservoir should be above the pump. It doesn't have to be directly above the pump, but in terms of the height, it needs to be above the pump. Everything else, it doesn't matter what position is. You can go from pump to radiator to CPU to pump. Again, you can go from pump to radiator to CPU. You can go pump graphics card, radiator, CPU, it doesn't matter. There'll be negligible temperature change. It does not matter. You'll get a better performance increase from going for a high-end water block than you will from the different oriented or position of the parts. So parts does not matter except for the pump and the reservoir. Reservoir or pump must always feed from the reservoir. Then this is only really applicable if you're using soft tubing. I don't really have any experience with hard tubing, hardline tubing, so go do some research about that. I don't know a lot about it, but for soft tubing, it's easiest just to fit one end of the tubing on a fitting, run it to where it wants to go, put your finger there and cut it, and then just slip it on. Don't cut too much because it's easier to cut. It's better to cut too little than too much because it's really hard to get the last little bit of tubing out because the tubing will flex and you'll end up with a bent cut and it just won't fit correctly. So cut exactly how much you need or too little, and if you work from longest runs to smallest runs, chances are you'll have enough. If you cut a too small piece of tubing, you'll have enough tubing for a smaller run out of that piece of tubing. So don't cut too much and plan your runs. Next, once you've got everything together, it's easy to just power on your system and forget about it, but don't do that. What you're going to want to do is plug your pump into an external power supply with the power supply bridge so that it will turn on automatically without being plugged into a computer, and then plug your pump into that power supply, turn the power supply on. Once you've filled the computer, never let your pump run dry. Never let your pump run dry. But once you've filled the water, your loop, run it for at least a day with paper towels underneath all your fittings and anywhere where it might leak, and make sure that there are no leaks. This way, because you have an external power supply just powering the pump, there is no chance of damaging your components. So if there is a leak, you can dry out your components so that there will be no damage. There might be some corrosion, but you can act against that if you get it quickly. Next, use some sort of biocidal agent or silver kill coil in your loop to prevent growth. I know Mayhem's makes a good biocidal agent. Just one or two drops every few months and it'll kill all the bacteria in your loop. So yeah. And then last but not least, check your loop regularly. There is a chance that over time you will develop a leak. So just every month or two, just check your reservoir and make sure it's not dropping, and just make sure that your loop is flowing nice and smoothly, that there's no obstructions. And yeah, so that has been my top tips and tricks for water cooling beginners. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, and goodbye.